Assalamu alaikum, good evening. Welcome to Legal Ease, where we make the law easy for you. This evening, we've got a very important guest, and of course, everybody's heard of the new national minimum wage, which is coming in. And I've got this evening with me the director of the CCMA, Mr. Cameron Moorjani. He's been the director for a while. Some of you may remember just over a year ago, he was in here as a guest as well. But just a reminder that he possesses a B. Juris degree, which he obtained from UNISA in the year 2000. He obtained his LLB and further obtained his LLM in 2007, also with UNISA, specializing in labor law and the law of contracts. He's been the CCMA director, and he's been making a lot of changes. I'm not going to go through his entire CV because I think we've said enough. Mr. Moorjani, thank you for making yourself available again. It's good to have you here, and it's always good to have the experts there and viewers. We will, as you know, open the lines after the first ad break when you will be able to call in or make comments if you need to. Let's perhaps kick off. You've got a big conference coming on starting in a day or two. It's a 2-day conference at Gallagher Estate. It's about the state of readiness for the national minimum wage. Maybe the first question, let's kick, what is the CCMA stand on the national minimum wage? Is that a fair question?
Yeah. Well, take into account, you say, what is our standpoint? We literally won't have a standpoint because as an institution of statutory creation, when a legislation is being enacted, our obligation is to implement. And it is exactly the same case when it comes to the minimum wage. Upon its creation, it is a bill stage at the moment. We are right in the middle of the education and training, awareness and advocacy campaigns. All we can do is to comply and apply what we should apply in terms of the application that arise from the legislation itself. Yeah, that would be our standpoint, if we were to call it that.
Right. Because it's going to be a lot of new work for the CCMA. I mean, previously a lot of these things from the Basic Conditions of Employment Act was done by the Department of Labor. But now it seems to be moving over to the CCMA. Do you already know exactly what amount of work it's going to be? Which are the cases you're going to be dealing with? Are you going to take over all the work of the Department of Labor, or is it still going to be certain issues only in the Department of Labor?
Thanks for that question. One thing that I can confirm is that the caseload of the CCMA is going to increase significantly. The reason for that is that in the past, when it comes to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the CCMA did not have jurisdiction on matters arising out of that. You will recall that when we're talking about the basic conditions, it's about all the terms and conditions of employment are set out there, your leave, your maternity leave, the remuneration, and things like that, deductions from salaries. It's all set out in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So any dispute that arises in terms of that legislation, ordinarily it was expected that it must be referred to the Department of Labor. And we used to have a number of employees, and for them it was a question of seeking assistance where they think they can get help, and they know the CCMA to be an institution created to protect persons of that category. So the expectation of having a lot of cases largely is based on the fact that the type of cases that we are going to be dealing with, it is largely covering those that we call below the threshold in terms of Section 6, subsection 3 of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. It has to do with, amongst other things, the underpayments that persons will have. If there's an outstanding payment of any kind, as the Act puts it. Now the CCMA has jurisdiction, yet ordinarily we did not have that jurisdiction. And if you look at the number of persons who complain about being underpaid, complaining about missing payments, talking about deductions of payments, now a new obligation has been created, which is the big one, which was referred by the President in his State of the Nation address, called the National Minimum Wage, setting the standard that everyone who's in that category should be paid 20 Rand per hour. And if you're not paid that, or you're paid less than that, then the CCMA's jurisdiction has been expanded to deal with cases such as those. But it's not limited to the minimum wage. It talks about all forms of payment, underpayment, wrong payments that have been made. now will come to the CCMA. So the number of people that the Department of Labor that used to deal with in as far as those type of disputes are concerned that were not part of the CCMA, all those cases now will be coming to the CCMA, which will then significantly increase the caseload of the CCMA.
Okay, and I suppose that's why you're calling the conference the State of Readiness Conference. And maybe we should
Yes.
talk about the conference.
Yes.
Because everything you're talking about now is going to be covered by the conference. Perhaps, what is the purpose of the conference? Who's it aimed at?
Okay. Let me respond to the question. Thanks for that question because it's quite critical for our conference. When we became aware of our new obligations in terms of the minimum wage, when we become aware of the changes that are being made in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act with CCMA expanded jurisdiction, we then realized that there's going to be a huge confusion between the two main institutions, being the CCMA and the Department of Labor. So for people who used to go to the Department of Labor to raise the type of cases that we are talking about, will now be expected to come to the Commission. But if we do not do an advocacy campaign to show those that are affected by these changes in employment law, then you'll continue to have people being played between the CCMA and the Department of Labor. Therefore, we have a responsibility to ensure that because it has to do with where cases should be referred to, what we call jurisdiction, it's important that people understand that before the actual legislation becomes law on the 1st of May 2018. It will not help if with this change of jurisdiction or the cases that needs to be referred to the CCMA, that we don't give clarity on if you have underpayment on minimum wage, don't go to the Department of Labor, come to the CCMA because only the CCMA can deal with those matters. So this conference, with the theme saying the state of readiness, it actually is talking about all persons and institutions that are directly and indirectly affected by this change in the basic conditions and also with the introduction of the minimum wage, for them to understand that as we stand now in March, where are we in terms of our state of readiness? And the institutions in particular that we are referring to about state of readiness, top of the list, it is the CCMA. Secondly, it is the Department of Labor. So those are the two institutions that are leading. So, and the third leg, which is critical, it's Parliament, because Parliament is the one that passes legislation. So it is important for the country to understand that, firstly, is Parliament ready to deliver the minimum wage, the basic conditions, and the amendment to the Labour Relations Act on the scheduled date being the 1st of May 2018? In the CCMA, there are different components there. The commissioners are top of the list. We must be able to make a declaration to the public and say to them, while we have been experts in employment law, specifically on the Labour Relations Act and the Employment Equity Act, now we've become experts in the minimum wage and the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So the commissioners who are the decision makers of such legislations, especially the new one, we must say to the public to give them confidence, to give them comfort that the commissioners of the CCMA are ready to deal with your cases. We must be able to say that the case management officers, who are the ones who receive cases that are referred, that they understand the distinction between what goes to the CCMA and what goes to the Department of Labor and what goes to the Labour Court. Because it's important that we mention the Labour Court because it's quite critical that the majority of cases that you have in terms of the basic conditions, in terms of Section 73, those cases that has to do with undertakings that are issued in terms of Section 64 and also the compliance orders that are issued in terms of the same section were referred to the Labour Court for purpose of compliance. But in terms of the minimum wage, those processes in terms of that section have now been amended. They've deleted the portion that refers to the Labour Court. They say now if you are unhappy and you are not complying with the compliance order and the undertaking as issued by the inspectors, those matters must be referred to the CCMA. The one critical component which is important also under the Department of Labor, it is the inspectors themselves. Understanding, of course, that the inspectors mainly were doing with exactly that, inspections and issuing undertakings and compliance orders. Now they find themselves in a scenario where they have to interact for the first time directly with the CCMA and all in its offices in as far as complaints and matters arising out of the undertakings and compliance orders that they do. They must now understand how the process of the CCMA work. They must understand the CCMA Codes of Good Practice, CCMA guidelines, and most importantly, the CCMA rules, because it is only through that tunnel that matters are brought properly before the Commission and before the commissioners. So our campaigns, and also talking about the state of readiness for the purpose of the conference, we must be able to make that positive declaration that having had all those people who have presented, and having had all the things we've done in terms of the training and continue to doing, are we ready, all of us, in terms of all the institutions that we have? And most importantly also is that as matters stand, and we used to have the sectoral determinations which were now issued by the minister and through regulations. Yeah. And now that portion has now been deleted.
Yeah, because that was for domestic workers, for farm workers, for taxi drivers.
Yes, yeah. And all of those, now those have, in terms of the basic conditions of employment as it stands, it has been deleted. But we do have matters that exist currently that are, or sectoral determinations that are in existence. So there must be absolute clarity to the public and the users of the CCMA and the Department of Labour on what's going to happen with those sectoral determinations. And also to clarify what the jurisdiction of the Labour Court is, because if you look at Section 77, it will tell you that the Labour Court actually, when it comes to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, it has exclusive jurisdiction, except in cases where the Act provides otherwise. And under the current circumstances, with the introduction of the minimum wage, there is a provision that provides otherwise, where there's been introductions, for example, into the definition of employment law, that now, when it comes to certain specific legislations, the UIF one, for example, that the CCM now has jurisdiction. So those matters need not necessarily be referred to the Labour Court, where ordinarily a matter would be referred to the Labour Court. But it does not completely oust the jurisdiction of the Labour Court, because those that are above the threshold will have to still refer the matter to the CCMA, but they have a choice where they can refer the matter to the Labour Court. Yeah. So looking at that, we hope in the two-day conference that we're going to, because a focus in the main will be the minimum wage and the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Because for any person currently and in future who wants to understand what the new obligations are, what needs to be done, will have to read the Minimum Wage Act together with the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. But in our second day, we'll also be concentrating on the amendment that are affecting the Labour Relations Act.
Okay. A good place for us viewers to have a quick ad break. Stay with us. After the ad break, we will have the phone number on the screen. And please, if you have any comments, if you have any questions for the director of the CCMA, please feel free to call in. Assalamu alaikum again. Good evening, welcome. Our guest this evening is the director of the CCMA. The phone number will be on the screen. If you have any questions, if you want to call in, we're talking about the state of readiness conference that the CCMA has within another 2 or 3 days' time. It's a 2-day conference. They're going to be talking about the new national minimum wage to get people ready for that. Cameron, one of the things you mentioned is commissioners are going to be obviously overburdened. I will hope you're going to get a budget for this, because you need to obviously train commissioners, because there's something new.
Absolutely.
What have you done so far?
Yes. What we are doing now, and have been doing for a couple of weeks, is to develop our new training material specifically designed to train commissioners, for commissioners to understand their new obligations and their new jurisdictions, and also informing them also about the possible change to our rules. Because I'm sure you will recall that as Commissioner, that in 2015, when the 2015 amendments were introduced, we delayed publication of the new rules and the amendments we had, because we knew that the new provisions in the LRA will have a direct impact on our rules. So currently we have amended our rules in line with the bill as published now. And if nothing changes to the legislation now, our rules are going to be adjusted accordingly, especially dealing with the referral method, which is I call the practice and procedure, and for us to understand what the new obligations are in terms of the referrals. For example, if you have a compliance order that is issued by an inspector and the employer does not comply with that compliance order, what will then happen, the inspector must refer the case to the CCMA. But the inspector must know within what time must that be referred.
Because there are time limits for all these things.
Time limits are important, and know that if it's not referred on time, What does that mean in terms of condonation? If there's something wrong with that compliance order that has been issued, we must understand what the obligation is in as far as rescissions are concerned and all those powers. So we are developing material to train our commissioners on how to handle the new expanded jurisdiction for them to be able to handle them as they're being referred by inspectors and also directly from the employees.
Okay, because it's going to be a mess of it because you don't have much time. I mean, it's already the middle of March. We've got a caller on the line. Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Go ahead with your question or comment.
How much will be the minimum wage for domestic servants?
Okay, look, we're not going to go into that details, but the minimum wage for domestic workers is going to be 15 rands an hour. That's the proposed minimum wage.
And then for how many hours must you employ them?
Well, look, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act talks about a 45-hour week.
Or 45 times 50, minimum.
The minimum is going to be 15 rands an hour.
But I mean, for how many hours minimum can we employ them?
You can employ them for as many hours as you want, provided it's not more than 45 hours a week.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your call. Bye.
It's important that's an important question, in particular on the transitional arrangement that
Okay, can I stop you there? We've got another call on
sorry.
the line. Hello, good evening, go ahead. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I have a small business
Right.
which turns over about 60,000 rands a month and a 30% gross profit.
Yeah.
I employ 6 odd people from the local informal settlement to help me with this labor-intensive work.
Okay.
Now, if I have to put them off or don't employ them anymore, do I have to give them any severance or pay or something like that? Or well, I don't know if I can't afford to keep them anymore.
Okay, if you can't afford, then you'll have to do a retrenchment, yes. And we will, in 3 weeks' time, we're going to have another program dealing with those type of things, and you can call in again. But, I mean, those are the type of things that you're going to have to deal with.
There's a specific provision.
But again, can I just hold you there? Yes, you'll have to retrench if you can't afford people, but we're going to talk in a while about how you can afford. But there's another caller on the line? Okay, the caller. We often get this, I can't afford it, and I usually say...
Yeah, that
okay, we've got to call alive again. Sorry.
No problem.
We don't want to keep the callers waiting. Go ahead with your question.
Professor,
Yes.
my name is Jacob Lemusami.
Yes, Jacob.
I just want to find out, this conference, I received an invitation, and on that invitation it stated that we have to pay 850. And now yesterday I went to CCMA online, and then it was said the conference entrance is free. So now I want to find out, what about those that have already paid 850? What is going to happen? And when are we going to receive the confirmation that we can come to the conference? Because up to today, there's nothing.
Okay, let me
Thank you for
answer.
that, yeah.
Thank you for that. Let me answer it directly. The conference is for free. Yes, there was a notice that was issued because what we had was we had a lot of employers initially when we issued the conference who were interested to come and said, we do understand your budgetary constraints. And given the numbers of people that must come, we are prepared to pay a minimum fee, which is not any significant amount in terms of what is being charged. So when we got a cash injection for us to do these campaigns from the Department of Labor, then we were comfortable to hold the conference completely free. I have issued a clear directive to the team that for those who have paid, they must be paid back the money that they've paid because the conference is completely free. Okay. So the confirmations have been issued, and you can just contact us in case you were wondering whether you should be attending or not, because I know that there's a huge number, especially after we've confirmed the free entrance to the conference, that people will be repaid. It's not a big number. We had about 20 or so of people who paid. So we've got that in trust. We're going to be paying that money back to those specific persons who have paid. One thing that I asked the team to be cautious about is that you find that employers who pay on behalf of employees to come to the conference, but you can't repay to the employees because the money belongs to the employer. We don't want to create problems there. I just threw caution and I said, can we send the money back to the proper persons who paid for the conference? But I will ensure that by close of business tomorrow, that everyone who has applied, who's supposed to be in the conference, receive their notification that they must come to the conference. But you can take the word from me. Given that the conference for free, you are welcome to come to attend that conference because it's an important conference for the purpose of the way forward on what will happen in terms of the minimum wage and the Basic Conditions of Employment Act.
So you're actually encouraging, obviously, you want
I
as
am.
many people to come who need to know
It's
what's
important
going
for
on,
them,
and
yes.
it's particularly small businesses, because
Yes.
big businesses usually have their legal advisors, they have their HR people who
Yes.
can advise them on these things, but it's a small business,
Yeah.
really, who may struggle more with these type of things.
Yes, absolutely. I must issue a word of caution on the earlier question. What we don't want to see is what happened in the 2015 amendments when there was an introduction of the new sections that dealt with labor broking, fixed-term employment, and part-time employment. What you found happen is that people, in anticipation of that, they started to retrench and dismiss employees because they did not want to comply with the obligations of the new legislation. There is a provision that has been enacted as part of the bill, which says that if there's any change on the working conditions, salary, working hours, and things like that, that happens in contemplation of the oncoming minimum wage, it will be considered an unfavorable practice in terms of the short title amendment. So the conduct of what you do between now and the date of the implementation of legislation will, at the time when the Act becomes law, be dealt with retrospectively to 2017 to the extent that conditions of employment and wages, working hours have been changed because of the anticipated minimum wage. I did deal with that, interestingly, today with the Department of Labor, with my team, to confirm that. It is confirmed that it will be dealt with as an unfavorable practice, unless that the change that happens, it's a change that is in favor of an employee, that does not affect and prejudice them in contemplation of the bill, then it's not a problem. But if it's going to provide, for example, any prejudice to the employees because of the minimum wage that is coming in the basic conditions, it will be considered as an unfavorable practice and it will be referred to the CCMA and it will be dealt with in terms of that. On the face of it, it appeared to be something that is legally wrong to apply legislation retrospectively. But the intention of that provision is to protect abuse because of the anticipated change that is coming in as far as the minimum wage is concerned. So while it is correct generally that if you can't afford your employees, you can retrench, it is okay, I do understand, because that is a normal cause in terms of Section 189. But if that action that is taken, it's taken because of the minimum wage that is coming, then you're going to have to explain in terms of the provisions that I've just stated now.
Okay, and that's important, but it's time for an ad break. We can continue with that after the ad break. Viewers, please stay with us. After the break, we'll continue. And just a reminder, the phone number will be on the screen. You will be able to call in, and the director will clearly answer any questions you have in relation to the minimum wage, the conference particularly, and the role of the CCMA. Viewers, welcome back. We're talking about the minimum wage, which is going to come into effect on the 1st of May. We're talking about the CCMA conference, which is over 2 days. And those of you who were with us before the break will know that the director said it's going to be free. So that may be a bit of a concern, because I can imagine that surely people need to register first before they get there.
Absolutely. And
It's not like a stadium where you go and buy tickets.
No, you're absolutely spot on there. And it's just a caution and a request that I want to make to the viewers out there. For those who applied, please approach the CCMA for the confirmation. For those who have not applied yet, please apply first. instead of showing up, because the venue that we have at the Gallagher Estate in Midrand can take, I think, up to 600. And the numbers have been increasing quite significantly, especially that it's a free conference. And if you look at the lineup of the people that we've introduced into the program and the type of subjects they'll be talking about, the interest is quite high. So please go and register so that when you arrive, your name tag will be there, you'll be seated properly, and you then can enjoy the conference. If you don't, you may have challenges of getting through because the seats have been reserved for those that have applied and wanting to be part of the conference. Please, please make sure that you confirm and go to the CCMA for that purpose.
Now, you may want to consider big screens in the adjacent hall and sort of seating there for people. Because I can
Absolutely.
imagine more than 600 people are going to want to come
Yes.
to this.
The numbers are increasing every day, and the Minister of Labour must say she's very excited about it. She has called me and confirmed that she's coming because this is an important project. You will recall that the minimum wage was actually a baby of the Deputy President of the country, who's now become the President of the country. And he, as I said earlier, he has mentioned it in his State of the Nation address. So when we issued that notice for people to come for the conference, and they said, we are coming. And yeah, I think we probably will need the screens on the walls outside the venue itself.
Okay. Yeah, I know when you started at the CCMA just
Yeah.
over a year ago,
Yes.
you put a 5-year plan in place. This wasn't part of the 5-year plan, I would imagine.
Actually, it is, but not as a minimum wage conference, but as a conference. The new concept that we introduced, if I may explain, is that when we drafted, you remember our 5-year plan has annual plans built into them, which contains different things. One of the things that it has for this current financial year that is ending in March, it is an annual conference. So we will have annual conferences as part of our plan every year. What we wanted to change was an old thing that when people arrange conferences, they invite the CCMA to come to a conference. They make us pay to a conference where we're going to be speaking, where they'll be using our own material, our own statistics, our own everything.
Right.
But they make us pay for those conferences. So we then took a
So,
decision.
can I interrupt? Can I
Sure,
call you? We
sure,
don't want to
sure.
keep the callers waiting. Caller, go ahead with your question or comment.
Good evening, Director.
Good evening, sir.
Yes. I want to ask you, do you anticipate large-scale unemployment, and if there's large-scale unemployment, how are we going to handle that?
Sorry, I didn't.
He says, do you expect, because of the minimum wage, I think that's the
That's the money
question.
much, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you expect there's going to be a high unemployment rate as a result of it?
Yes.
No, not really. Not really. Unless we are clear about what the triggers of that would be. And the most obvious one will be that, which was like the one who asked the question earlier, if I can't afford, can I retrench? You know? And maybe if that's what you're referring to, that people will start not employing because of the minimum standards that have been set. It will be sad if that happened. But we do anticipate that there will be such scenarios, because I remember a lot of economists, a lot of researchers, and that's why we've included them in our program there. And also in terms of the youth as well, there'll be a specific, a specific presentation done in that regard, that there was an expectation in many presentations and conferences I've attended, that there was an expectation that there will be an increase in unemployment due to people not wanting to employ because of the minimum standards that have been set. There'll also be an expectation that people will be dismissed through operational requirements because people suggest that they can't afford them. But we must not forget why this is done. This is trying to reverse imbalances, inequalities of the past. We have seen huge amount of abuse of specifically the vulnerable sectors. We've seen the non-compliance with the four corners and provinces of social justice. When this minimum wage was set, which is an international concept, by the way, it was done to protect those categories. What we pray for is that the implementation of the minimum wage and its application must not be seen as an obligation. It must be seen as a social, economic cause which is intended to alleviate the triple crisis that we have of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. So if there's going to be a business decision that because there's a minimum standard, I'm not going to afford my domestic or my gardener, I'm going to dismiss her, you are actually contributing to unemployment and poverty. we should be putting efforts on finding ways on how we can meet the standard so we can better the lives of our people. This is the idea behind the minimum wage. But of course, we are not the same. People have different circumstances and challenges. You do expect that there will be certain job losses. What becomes a tricky question is to what extent.
Director, one more question is that
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Director, one more question.
Yeah.
Will this be a gradual process, or how will this work?
The gradual process in part is for the domestic workers, for example. But for the rest of the people, it's immediately effective from the 1st of May 2018. You will see also in the bill itself, it tells you that if there exists a collective agreement, a contract, or a law that makes provision of payment that is less than the minimum wage, the minimum wage finds application. So that tells you how serious that is. So it becomes effective from the 1st of May onwards. The only one that is phased in is the one of the domestic workers, because starting at 15, but over a year or so, it will be reviewed by the commission. It will then start to equalize with those of the rest of the society.
Okay, and of course the minimum wage is going to be reviewed every year.
Every year in terms
and
of
they'll take into consideration inflation, they will
All
take into
other
consideration,
factors.
the high unemployment rate if there is.
Yes. It is for that reason why the bill creates the Minimum Wage Commission. The Minimum Wage Commission is intended in the main to review annually the minimum wage as is, taking into account what Prof has mentioned now, to see if it needs to be increased and to what extent, and makes a report and submit it to the minister. Then the minister, upon receipt of that report from the commission, he then takes it to the cabinet. And the commission is composed of the different social partners. And what is interesting there, if you look at the composition of that commission, is not just government, labor, and business. It's also composed of experts that are part of that, who will be assisting the members of the commission in the review of the minimum wage.
Okay, on what you were saying, because the national minimum wage is going to be 20 rands an hour.
Correct.
The sort of farm workers, it's going to be a percentage of that. It's going to be about 18 rands an hour. Then domestic workers, that's going to be about 75% of that, which is going to be 15 rands an hour.
Correct.
But perhaps just to tell people about, we had minimum wages for domestic workers.
In the form of sectoral.
In terms of the sectoral determination.
Yeah.
We've got minimum wages at bargaining councils.
Yes.
And people haven't lost jobs as a result of that.
No.
I think the trick is to set the minimum wage at a level where you're not going to lose jobs.
Absolutely. It's a passionate plea that I think any responsible South African should appreciate and embrace. Let's create more employment, but not find ways of removing people from employment to create more unemployment. It has worked well. We do understand that, when you look at the growth of our economy and all those kind of factors, our downgrading issues, that it does have a direct impact on the employment, and the employment rate now is dipping below 27%. Those factors are understood. But the bottom line is that the sectoral determination as they existed did not cause unemployment. It should not be seen as a new introduction that is completely different from the sectoral determination. This is more formal, setting a very clear standard of what needs to apply, and this covers the entire society. And if you look at, of course, the extent and the jurisdiction of the application of this act is quite big. Of course, there's 2 or 3, like this, the security services and all those are excluded. But other than that, everyone else is covered. Everyone is expected to comply with those variations that you'll find in the act itself. And I must say, in anticipation of non-compliance, there's going to be punishment for people who don't comply. It's specifically stated in the act that if you do not comply with the minimum wage, at the commission, we will apply the punishment as provided for in the act, because we are, as the custodian, and looking at the category of those that we represent, we are going to exercise the punishment as provided for, which includes, amongst other things, doubling the difference of the pay that ought to have been paid and what we have paid, or the actual wage being doubled as a means of punishment, excluding what you should be paying in any event. It's provided for in the Act. So as the custodians in the Commission, we intend to do that because the Act asks us to.
But clearly, I mean, there's going to be a lot of advantages, obviously, to the, and that's going to be discussed at the conference as well.
That's correct.
And if you look at,
That's
I mean,
correct.
is 20 rands an hour, if you take an 8-hour day, 20 rands an hour, is it really that much?
No.
Can anybody really live with much less than that or with less than that? It really is difficult.
It is. Prof, I'm glad that you're putting it that way. The challenge I'm posing to us as South Africans, and taking into account the kind of history that we come from, it is important for us to understand why this is happening. Take, for example, if you go out on a Friday night and you're going with your buddies to go and have a dinner or have lunch or have a few drinks in one of the places where people like to have fun in. If you look at the cost of what you pay for such social events and for fun, if you look at many events, I was amazed sometimes if you look at, people do have weddings where it costs 10, 15 million rand just for a wedding. Yeah. I don't have a problem with people who can afford to do that, and that's within, but in a society of inequality, where we have such abject poverty, where all that the Act is asking for is that somebody who takes care of your house, who takes care of your children, who really manages your operations of the house in your absence, who receives your children when they come back from school, prepared food for them, and they're asking you to pay them 20 rand per hour for doing exactly what your responsibility is and ensuring that you have a proper upbringing of your own children. Should we have a problem with that? People who take care of our farms, they produce. Should we have a problem with that type of an amount? It's about us as South Africans making a decision that we make sacrifices on things that don't matter and use the money on things that really, really matters in terms of social justice.
And of course, we're going to go to an ad break, but just before we go to the ad break, if somebody can't, for a domestic worker, for example, if you can't afford that, instead of hiring the person for the full 8 hours a day, hire the person for 4 hours for the day. So, that can
avoid retrenching, removing. I think it's much better that way. A knee-jerk reaction to just say, I can't afford you, gone. I don't think that's an intelligent decision, economically and in terms of life as well. So I think that will make perfect sense, having regard to what I said earlier on in terms of the adjustments, yes.
Okay, with that, let's take an ad break, our final ad break for the hour. And after the ad break, please, viewers, call in if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you're not sure what's going to go on, if you have any questions about the conference, please call in. And if you haven't registered for the conference yet, you can still do so. Welcome again. We've got the director of the CCMA. We're talking about the Readiness Conference, which is taking place in 2 days' time. It's going to be starting, and it's a 2-day conference. And those of you who were with us before the break will know that you don't have to pay for the conference, but please register for the conference. The venue accommodates about 600 people. And if you haven't registered and you haven't been accepted, then if you're going to go there, you may have to stand on the outside and not get in. And I said to the director before the break, if you haven't been, maybe you need to put up big screens and hire the hall next door. Are contingency plans in place, perhaps, if you have too many people applying?
Well, my team has been working hard and trying to make some concessions with the owners of the venue. Right. When it comes to venues, they want you to be certain. How many do you bring? But with the type of work that we do and the type of contracts that we have, it's quite difficult to give certainty on how much. We've looked at possible contingency plans in terms of the increase in number, should that eventually happen, because the minister would like to see as many people present to give clarity on where we're going from here and where to go and what to expect.
Okay, I'd like to come back to that, whether the CCMA commissioners are sufficiently trained. I know you said training is, you're busy drawing up the training programs, you're busy getting the trainers ready, because trainers have to be trained as well, obviously.
Yes.
Because it's something new.
Yes,
it's like when every time the legislation changes, commissioners have to be trained.
Yes.
Have you got plans for how many commissioners you're going to be training at? Do you have enough commissioners?
No, we don't. I can just confirm we don't.
Right.
We don't have enough case management officers as it is to accommodate the number of people that we're talking about. We're going to have to look at the increase of our interpreters as well, Because if you look at the category of the people we're talking about, language is going to become essential so that that which we explain must be understood. We have approached our, the Department of Labor, because we get our grant and funding from the Department of Labor. We've submitted to them on how much we need, taking into account what we anticipate. And so far it's under consideration because it's also appreciated. I can also confirm to you that when we appeared in Parliament, and I think 3 weeks ago, at the Portfolio Committee, after we've presented about the minimum wage and exactly the question that you're asking, the parliamentarians themselves said, do you have enough budget to cater for this? The answer was no, we don't. Yeah. We don't. But we've made the request, and the Department of Labor is working very hard to work with us, to accommodate us, for us to be able to meet that. Because we have to increase the different classes of our commissions that we have, and the case management officers. We have to train the inspectors for them to understand the process. And for us to be able to achieve all of that, we have to have enough budget to do it. I mean, to have a venue like the one in Midrand, if you can't afford it, we can't take people there.
That's true.
So funding is critical for the success of the minimum wage. I can say here without doubt, if the CCMA is unable to execute the minimum wage and the basic conditions as is, the whole idea and why the minimum wage done is going to collapse.
Yeah. Because compliance is important. And how do you enforce compliance if you don't have the manforce?
And that you can only do at the Commission. And we are the custodians. If you look at the purpose why the bill was done, it was to expand the jurisdiction of the CCMA for us to make sure that the minimum wage becomes a success.
Yeah. These days already, when you go to the CCMA, sometimes, the commissioners sometimes have a difficult to find a room, to find a venue.
That's correct.
So it's interpreters, it's venue,
Yes.
it's training. What else is involved? You see, we don't think about it.
You're absolutely, Prof, you're absolutely spot on there. What we have done, the other day I was in the Free State, and the commissioners, they said to me, we've created a Welcome office, but we have now grown beyond 20% in a very short period of time. But when you're expanding like that, you need a bigger venue, which is what we have now just approved for them to get a new venue. Mpumalanga is facing exactly the same scenario. Even in Gauteng, our VAL offices and all of those offices require more venues, but the increase of the resource requires an increase of personnel too, which in the form of commissioners. Because we did a study, before even the minimum wage was introduced, on whether on the capacity that we have now, are we able to cope? The answer was no. We needed about 24 million rand for us to at least break even on what we have before the minimum wage. So now you can imagine with the new jurisdiction, expanded jurisdiction, which includes the type of work we're talking about, we are really going to be stretched thinly in ensuring that we implement the new provisions of the two important legislations.
Yeah. And because this training it's not just about the minimum wage, because you employ a commissioner, you can't say you're only going to do the minimum wage. You need to know the Labour Relations Act, you need to know conciliation, you need to know arbitration, and that training is not 1 week or 2 weeks.
It cannot
it's
be.
Several.
Yeah.
We know, for example, the universities, Wits University, Stellenbosch,
Yes.
and are busy doing commissioner training.
That's correct.
They then, when do you start advertising?
For
new commissioners.
We are recruiting as it is now.
So advertisements
nationwide.
Are out there already.
Yeah, we are recruiting. We're recruiting as it is. We've had interviews. Interestingly, I'm standing here and sitting here as the director with pride when I hear that the number of people who applied to be commissioners is so great that even when we conducted interviews, we had to go through 25 candidates per day of the number of people who applied to be commissioners. One of the clear directives I've issued to the team was that, at least for now, when we employ part-time commissioners, do not put a limit to that, because they are not really a cost until you use them. But you must have a pool of commissioners who are properly appointed and competent and accredited as such, that they are in the pool and ready to be used, instead of not having any. And when you have to recruit again, because the recruitment process is quite difficult. But what is clear is that we are going to continue in recruiting because we need more commissioners. But it's not just that part, it's also the support staff. that we called our case management officers. We need to employ more there, because as volumes of cases come through, before they get to commissioners, they must be dealt with by the case management
front
officers.
desk, obviously.
The front desk. So if your numbers are low, then your backlog will build. Then people will get more frustrated. Then our efficiency, which is a very good record at the moment, will be quite significantly impacted on negatively because we're failing to deliver. But not because we don't have the competent commissioners to do it, but because we have few of those, because we could not afford to have more. That's why we're putting this impression upon the Department of Labor, which is on board to assist us to ensure that we expand our human resources to cover for that.
And it's often, people don't think of that because you have to train people at the front desk. The Department of Labor has to train people at the front desk.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
for now, if it's to do with wages, if it's to do with the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, first stop is the Department of Labor. Now they're going to go there, and if the person there hasn't been trained, he's not going to know that he has to say, we don't have the jurisdiction anymore. You need to go to the CCMA.
It's going to be a problem. You know, Prof, interestingly, as I was meeting with the team, we looked at the definition of employment law as it is now and has expanded, which includes the minimum wage. It includes a number of new legislation that is not just about the minimum wage and basic conditions, it's also about the UI Act that has been introduced, the skills development portion, which is now, employment services has substituted that. If you look at that expanded definition of employment law, you see that a significant part of the legislation are things that we never dealt with before, but which is not an issue. So it means our training of our commissioner now for future training programs that we do for commissioners, it has to be expanded to include those new parts of what the new jurisdiction brings. But you can't train the part of the commission alone, like you correctly said. You have to train the Department of Labor inspectors to understand the content of employment law, to understand the CCMA content of the prescripts that we use from guidelines, code of good practice, the rules that we use. So yes, it's not a quick fix. We're going to have to consistently, over a period, be able to train them.
Okay, yeah, and that's important. But I think we don't have much time, and we need to focus on the conference.
Yes.
Because we need to make sure that everybody understands what the
Yes.
conference is about.
Yes.
I know we've touched on it at the moment,
Yes.
at the beginning,
Yes.
but just as a reminder, in case anybody switched on late, what is the main focus? And I come back to this. I know I did ask you at
That's
the beginning,
important, yeah.
but I think we need to go back to this because this is really important in case anybody missed us. Please tell us, what is the main focus of the conference? Who is it aimed at? And, perhaps what is
Okay.
going to be the major contribution here?
No, thank you very much for that question. I think that question, even if it's asked more than once, it's a necessary question to deal with. The employment law, specifically the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Minimum Wage, and the Labor Relations Act have been amended. In particular, there's a new baby that has been introduced called the minimum wage. We've never had it before, now we have it, supported by the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. It is a program that was driven by the President. Now, this legislation, which is critical, is coming into force on the 1st of May 2018. Now, for us to be able to comply, we must understand our obligations and understand who it affects. And at this stage, being March, we must be able to convey clarity on the content of that legislation. Secondly, to give a clear way forward on where we are going with this legislation, and for everyone who's affected to understand where we're at now. That's why we're calling it the state of readiness. Are we ready as the CCMA? Are we ready as the Department of Labor? Is Treasury ready? And are the courts ready? So we must make a clear declaration that all those institutions are ready to implement the minimum wage. This conference, it's intended to give that declaration that we are ready, or if we're not ready, to what level are we ready, and when are we going to be fully ready for the full implementation of the minimum wage. So at the end of the conference, you will understand where we're at. You will understand where we're going. You will understand the content and the application of the minimum wage and understand what your role is and where to go in case there's a violation of that minimum wage and the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. That's what this conference is about.
Okay, and there have been other amendments, but we're not going to talk about that because we've run out of time. But fathers, watch this program. In 2 or 3 weeks' time, we're going to be talking about paternity leave, and fathers will be happy to know you're going to get 10 days leave if the new law is accepted. But again, as the director of the CCMA, Mr. Cameron Morajani, thank you very much for making yourself available. I think it's been very useful, and we wish you every success with the conference. And people, it is not too late. If you haven't signed up for the conference yet, you still have time. Thank you very much. Good night. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much.